Welcome back here to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to move on to our second segment talking about the Denver Broncos and how they're progressing with their contract negotiations with their star wide receiver, Courtland Sutton. Courtland Sutton was part of this wide receiver group this offseason that was trying to look for a contract negotiation, trying to get an extension done with the Denver Broncos, although this one's a little different, a little bit more low-key because Sutton and the Denver Broncos haven't really talked too much about it. Everything's been downplayed. Everything's been kept to a minimal compared to other situations like Brandon Ayuk or Tyreek Hill talking about his deal. Guys like that. This one has really been hardly talked about at all. I've mentioned it on a few occasions, but there really hasn't been, one, any progression from it, and two, the Broncos not saying too much, and Courtland Sutton also not saying too much. But when you look at it from the beginning of this offseason, Courtland Sutton has been away from the team during the voluntary portions of the offseason, but he did show up during mandatory minicamp, and now reporters suggest that Courtland Sutton could be thinking of holding out of training camp because when he was asked about it from one of these reporters about pondering over the idea of holding out during training camp, he just responded simply with "we'll see" when he was asked about skipping training camp over the contract stalemate that he finds himself in. And on that sentiment, when he said "we'll see," he continued on to elaborate a little bit more when he said, I'm hoping that we're able to find a solution because this is where I want to be, and I'm just hoping that the feeling is mutual. He also brought up his desire to win a Super Bowl with the Broncos, retire with the Broncos, and eventually, hopefully, have a bid for the Broncos Ring of Honor. So it looks like Courtland Sutton isn't too bothered about the situation with the Denver Broncos. It looks like he really is committed, or at least he's painting a good picture to be very committed to the Denver Broncos and this long-term project, and just really buying into what Sean Payton is trying to build there with a new quarterback coming in with Bo Nix. It seems like he's not trying to jump ship. He is 10 toes down, wants to help rebuild the Broncos and be a massive part of their legacy going forward. But I think it's in a weird situation because that is what Courtland Sutton wants to do, but what is in the best interest for the Denver Broncos? In all honesty, they've made a lot of questionable decisions over the last few years with the Russell Wilson deal. They had to get rid of Jeffrey Simmons because they put themselves in a bind off of that Russell Wilson deal. And just the quarterback situation, quite honestly, from the time of Peyton Manning has been anything less than ideal for the Broncos. So you have the coaching changes as well, and Nathaniel Hackett and how that whole thing played out. Sean Payton comes in there and his bad relationship with Russell Wilson towards the end. Everything's just been a big mess away from football, and on the field, when we're talking about football, it hasn't been a great product on the field as well. So how you try and finally shuffle through the mess and find some sort of hope in it, I think it starts with Courtland Sutton because he is one of the very few valuable pieces I think they really have on this team. And with that being said, Courtland Sutton still remains on a 4-year contract. When we talk more about his contract negotiations, he remains on a 4-year, $60 million deal that he received a few years back. He is under contract until 2025, so it's not like they're on a deadline to try to extend him, but the main problem with Sutton and trying to get an extension done or a renegotiation is that it's not so much about the salary, but the guaranteed money that comes with that contract, because only $2 million of the remaining deal is the only part that's guaranteed. Almost similar to Matthew Stafford trying to get some more guaranteed money as the deal goes on towards the end of this deal, or getting more guaranteed money with a new deal. It's very similar to Matthew Stafford, but obviously the age difference is a big point to consider here. With Courtland Sutton only being 28 years old, combined with where Denver is right now currently, and really being not even at the start of this rebuild, not even taking the first step. They're still trying to stand up, honestly, from being knocked down from that Russell Wilson deal. Eric Rodriguez says in the comments, does the Broncos whiff on the Russell Wilson contract be the reason this team can't give Sutton an extension? It is a big part of it. I was going to get to that and just mention that their salary situation just puts them in a bad spot where I just don't think it's worth it, because you're already in a hole with the Russell Wilson deal, the backlash of it, and having to deal with huge dead money hits to your salary cap. And now you talk about Courtland Sutton and this deal, and the least desirable problem with the contract for the Broncos is the guaranteed money, because now we're talking about not dancing around the salary or converting it to a signing bonus. All those sort of things that teams are able to do to work around the salary cap, they're not able to do because Courtland Sutton is trying to get more guaranteed money. So it just doesn't line up to me. If they're already in a hole and you want to guarantee maybe a lot of money, I don't know how much Courtland Sutton is asking for, but it's all going to be guaranteed. So it doesn't really, add up to trying to rebuild this team from where they are right now. If you're giving him however much guaranteed money he wants and you're already in a bad spot, it doesn't help build out the rest of the team on how it could improve. On the defensive side of the ball, they could use a lot of help. Their offensive line isn't great also. What are they going to do with the quarterback situation? Is it going to be Bo Nix or is it going to be Zach Wilson? How that's all going to play out. It's probably going to be Bo Nix, but you want to get him as much help as possible, and I don't think just guaranteeing money to one player is going to do all that much for him and the entire organization. So it has to do a lot with that Russell Wilson, contract, the backlash of it, like you mentioned, Eric. So it puts them in a bad spot, and I just don't think their timelines really match up, because Sutton is still in a good spot where he wants to win right now, and like I mentioned before, the Broncos are still trying to stand up from taking that huge hit from that Russell Wilson contract and releasing him. It still was the right choice. I think they did a good job of, just getting it over with right now. But you have to take on the consequences of giving him that massive contract and it turning out in the worst possible scenario that it could have. And the lineup, the timelines with Courtland Sutton being in a situation where 28 years old, pretty much in the prime of his career, I would think he is looking for a situation to win right now and be as successful as possible right now. And I just don't think the Broncos could give them that. And at the same time, I don't think Courtland Sutton can give the Broncos what they're looking for, because he is looking for guaranteed money at the end of the day, especially because if we're talking about what they could do with him now and why I believe they should, cash in on him now, where he's coming off of a great season, having all those quarterbacks play for him last year. He, without a doubt, was their best player, without a doubt, their most talented player probably on their entire team. And with that being said, you could leverage that a little bit more with other teams trying to trade him. Maybe you could squeeze out a couple of picks instead of just one, or of higher value instead of lower value. I think right now is the perfect time, honestly, to trade a guy like Courtland Sutton, because they already got rid of one of their valuable assets in Jeffrey Simmons. They released him because he just became too expensive for what they were in a hole with Russell Wilson, so they had to release him. You got nothing back from him. So at the same time now, with Sutton, you still have a valuable diamond here sitting here on your team, and it's obviously going to be great if you could keep it. You don't want to part ways with that shiny, valuable asset that you have, but for the benefit of the long-term vision for this Broncos team, they haven't been very prominent in any sort of playoff contention, AFC West contention, anything for the last few years because of the quarterback issue, and now they're in another bad spot with it again. This is a perfect time to sort of speed up that rebuild and get up a little bit now from being knocked down from that Russell Wilson trade. Sutton could definitely be traded for a good amount, I believe, in this offseason or next offseason also, because I just don't think it will benefit the Broncos that much in the long term. Trading Sutton will also, you could say, to try and keep Courtland Sutton, to make an argument for keeping him because he is a good player. You don't like to get rid of good players. You could say that he helps develop Bo Nix. Having that great elite wide receiver one does help Bo Nix develop. And while I do see that point, I just can't see it really making that big of a difference, because if you're only talking about one weapon, I mentioned it with other rookie quarterbacks, young quarterbacks, you need multiple. You need a multitude of weapons, protection, and all these things to at least have a decent season and not look like a complete bust. If you only have really Courtland Sutton, and I don't want to discredit other pieces that they brought in, because I like them drafting Troy Franklin. I like that they signed Josh Reynolds from the Lions. Marvin Mims seems to be getting some good praise during training camp, but again, I just don't see it at the level where it's really going to take Bo Nix that much further than where he would be without Courtland Sutton and the rest of these guys. If you trade Courtland Sutton, you get more in the future to potentially help Bo Nix more so later on. You don't like to throw away the season before it even starts, but in reality, they're not in a position right now to have Courtland Sutton on their team and think you're going to do much better than you did last year. Even with Bo Nix coming in, it doesn't really make that much of a difference for me. But that's just how I feel. What they could get for trading Courtland Sutton, that's a whole different conversation if they decide to go that route. But for right now, it seems like they're still in contract negotiation talks. So we're going to keep track of that as we move on through the offseason and as we move on with this show, because we're going to move on to the next topic, talking about Hassan Reddick. Another contract dispute going on in the NFL with Hassan Reddick being traded from the Eagles to the Jets. Hasn't stepped foot on the practice field at all with the New York Jets. Why that's a big problem in my opinion, and what can we do to solve this mess, because that's the last thing the Jets need is another distraction away from football. We're going to get into that when we return after this break. Don't go anywhere.
Look